but you weren't IB-ing. You were like, I saw the hanging.
Yes, aerial yoga.
Yeah.
There was a little bit of both, but you can choose what you put onto Instagram.
Yeah. Okay, that's fair. No, I'm not a party person myself, so I've never gotten into. I haven't been to Ibiza. I've been to Canary Islands. That's where I kind of grew up in a way. Like my grandparents had a villa up there. They sold it recently.
Really, where?
Lanzarote.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's quite cool. But that's funnily enough, someone I brought up in my research, an artist that's based out of Lanzarote, Cesar Manrique. His stuff's really cool. But that's something that I've found really inspiring, and that's what I look for when I go traveling. I don't know, I can't get into partying. I just want to absorb, but at the same time, I wish I could party, let loose a little bit, relax
a
little bit. But yeah, so I guess, I feel like I still have to give you some sort of an introduction for everyone that's listening. This is like my first episode since Christmas, and so you've been my tutor for since September, but
academic year.
Yeah, and then properly more kind of closely in part 2, which started when was part 2 again? December?
Just November.
Cool. But yeah, what in terms of, let's start off with, what in terms of the course do you think what do you want to provide as a tutor? What's your
I love opening students' eyes.
Yeah. Because I initially remember speaking to you about when we last tried to record this, but unfortunately I forgot the thing. The kind of, what's the word, the feeling you get when you feel like you've opened, you can see when you've helped and assisted a student to find something. So tell me more about what's that process like for you?
That's the reason d'etre, right? That's the value. I particularly like this course because you meet a vast range of students, different walks of life, different experiences, different backgrounds, different abilities, and different confidence levels. And by the end of it, everybody's raring to go and ready for the next stage. Very few that have no pathway, and even so, then that makes them more resilient when they do join.
Well, I guess so. The age-old question I think is for a lot of people is and you always get the wisecracks from especially when I told people I was doing an art course. They were like, art's subjective, So in terms of I've started to understand this, and if I'm wrong, chip in, but it's not about, you can't look at any of it really particularly objectively, apart from in the sense of how that particular person is producing work. It's finding out how because especially with this course is everyone comes out with a completely different experience. No one, as opposed to if you do an engineering course, you're all learning a specific rigorous thing, but some people come out this feeling like they've learned something in one direction completely different to something in another. So I guess the question is for you in terms of, what do you look for? How do you feel like you can incubate people when they're I guess growing in the course?
Well, that's it. You've answered it. It's the growth mindset. So everyone's at different abilities, and it's about understanding where they're at and pushing them to achieve, depending on where they want to go, what they want to do. And everyone's at different levels. So It's growth. That foundation and experimentation. That's what foundation is.
Yeah. Would you say it's more experimentation, experimentational here than other places? In terms of, what do you think CSM does in comparison to other schools?
Oh, no, definitely. I think if you've really got the most out of the course, then you've been extremely experimental.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things is when I remember when like talking to my family and stuff, even as like late as Christmas, and they were kind of like, oh, so what have you been? It's like we barely even touched fabric. And I remember like it's so late in the process to actually do anything fashion.
But it's not a fabric course.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think understanding that, the fact that that actually we try and steer you away from fabric. And you say late in the course, but actually you've got the inductions and you've got the introductions, and just finding your feet and your level and your peers, all of that is growth too. So yes, you start to find your style and your strengths and your weaknesses around Christmas. So I think it was in the right order.
Yeah. I mean, I guess personally, like this was complete, like it's like I kind of was in that fresh mindset of like I hadn't even been in education, let alone in a creative educational space for years. So yeah, I think like at least my like school, I never felt particularly encouraged to be creative, and I don't know if that's quite as fault with the education system or more just I think it's what early creative development in that space felt like at my school was very much they prided themselves on their sports. They were a sports school, and there's a little bit of dramatic arts. They were kind of like, oh yeah, we've got our own theatre and stuff like that. But it was the art department definitely got shit on a little bit. Like they especially when the big nice design technology department got built, so they were like less, the art department felt more like art history. It felt more like you were kind of learning what art already existed, but there was no real encouragement to kind of do anything and explore ideas. It was more like, okay, this is how you would do still life. This is how you do blah, blah, blah,
But I think that is a good solid foundation to, A-levels for me is very much about art history, knowing who's who, what's what, eras, and the understanding. And hopefully if it's a good course, then you're also doing some drawing and understanding and learning techniques, paintings. But it really is a closed book, that level.
Yeah. You
look at something, you research it, you react, outcome. Foundation's about experimentation.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think like, so coming from the outside looking in and going, and so with the first part, I was surrounded by all these young people who seem to figure out, they seem to be kind of on it already. People are like, and I've never put together a proper sketchbook. I've never put together a proper portfolio. I had no experience in the design development process. So I remember especially the little walkarounds that we did at the beginning, they saved me because they kind of made me realize, okay, this is what you can do. I'm sitting here thinking I'm trying to fit into some regimented style and stuff, but there's really interesting freedom there.
And I think that's what the course is really successful at, really opening your eyes at what is possible and not sort of hopefully highlighting somebody's good practice and saying this is what you all need to achieve. It's really getting a diverse range and saying, oh, it could be like this, or you could do this, or you could do it, and then pushing you and then seeing if you can combine techniques. And each time we don't like showing pictures from the year before too much because we don't want that stereotypical outcome.
Yeah.
We want you all to grow, and it depends who we have and what levels you're at.
Yeah, no. So you did foundation yourself, did you?
I did foundation at Loughborough. I loved it. Best time of my life.
Yeah. How could you compare the experience to kind of now you're on the other side? What's the two experiences like for you?
Somebody asked me this actually. I definitely wanted out of London because I grew up in London. So when I was looking around, I went around with my dad and we looked at all the different courses. My tutor at the time wanted me to go to Manchester. Really good course. And I have to say, when I arrived, I didn't like the campus. I didn't like the welcome or the non-welcome. And when I was interviewed, it was a really old chap. And he said, Victoria, I've got 150 places, 400 applicants. What makes you so special? And I just saw red.
God.
And I just gave him a monologue of, hang on a minute. You didn't have any parking spaces. You know, it wasn't welcoming. Your rooms are shoeboxes. There's, you know, if there's going to be 150 on the course, where's my desk going to go? And then afterwards I said to my dad, my God, I've blown up. So, you know, so sorry. This man was so rude. And I got an unconditional offer in the post. And he wrote a note saying, I love the fact that you speak your mind. And when I was that young, I didn't really understand that my honesty, now I really value that. And if I tell you something, if I like something, or if I don't like it, it's my opinion, and I'm really honest with it. I don't skirt around. I'm quite black and white in that respect. It's always been that way. I just, over the years, realised that's part of me.
Did you, is there anything that kind of, when you were in foundation with the tutors, that you think you try to replicate now, or did you, or was it the opposite? Like, was there things that you're like, okay, on reflection?
No, I was just really experimental. The course was slightly different to the setup we have here. We went into different projects, so you learned different skills, and then you could specialise in 2, and then they chose your strongest, and then that's what you put your portfolio together for. I just loved every minute. So my social side was really good. I lived in a big house with about 20 of us. And I have quite a maternal instinct, so I'd always be sort of gathering the troops and being organised, and it just really worked. And so then you've got, you know, once you find your people, they support you, you support them, and you grow. So it's about growth.
Yeah.
Back to growth. But yeah, I just tried every project and really liked what I was doing.
Was they as intense as the projects at CSM? Like, what were you having, like week-long projects, or were they longer than that? Did you have a bit more?
God, you asked me to delve back into history. I can't remember. We certainly could get our teeth into the projects. But at Loughborough, everything's underpinned by drawing.
Okay.
So, and I think that was really invaluable. And I didn't know how much until I went to Royal College later on. But when I was doing foundation, I had no ideas of any course I wanted to do or my future. And it just happened that fashion textile tutor said to me, "Oh, Loughborough BA are interviewing. I think you should go for an interview." I was like, "No, I'm not. I've got boyfriend commitments back home. I'm going to go back to London." She said, "Well, I just would really like to see whether you'd get in. Do you think you could do the interview?" No. Anyway, she convinced me to go. I got an offer. I thought I did not want to go back home. When I got the offer, I realised, actually, something could happen here. You know, let's see. This is a really good course. Quite a few of my friends are going. Let's try it. And then if it doesn't work out, then I'll go back home. And that was probably the make or break of, again, another change in me of, wow, let's try this course. I loved Loughborough. We had 100 students on the course, and then they divided it into 3 sections. So there was print, weave, and multimedia, run by quite sort of strong heads of the course. And I probably spent quite a lot of my time working to get money rather than on the course, which is why I really like a student who isn't so committed, because committed students are going to get by and do well. Mature students are quite focused. But when you have a challenging student who doesn't maybe want to be there, who has other issues or money issues, they're the students that I really enjoy working with, because I feel that I'm sort of helping someone from my past, or sort of making amends. And so if you were to interview any of my tutors, I don't think they were really that impressed with me from my sort of academic side.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah.
Didn't see myself going on a BA. I think I've told you this.
Yeah.
And then was on the BA. I'm not sure if I told you. So we in Loughborough. Have you ever been to Loughborough?
I can't remember. I don't know if I have. I don't think I have. No.
It's in the middle of nowhere. And so students have to raise their own money to have their exhibition down in London because nobody goes up to see it apart from your parents.
Sure.
And my roommate was running the sort of committee, and then we had treasurers, and it was all a big thing. And the girl that she was running the show with, her mum was quite ill, so she had to drop out. Meanwhile, I'd been organising all the parties. I love a party. I love getting everyone together. And so then we had to vote in someone to help my roommate kind of just get us down to London and do the show. And so everyone had to write on a piece of paper and hand it in. And looking around the room thinking, oh yeah, that'll be good. Wrote someone's name down. And then afterwards, I got called Vicky then. So they're reading out, so Vicky. It was really overwhelming because they said, look, if you can organise parties, you can organise this event. And it wasn't on my radar. I wasn't that kind of person. And I was really overwhelmed with the fact that everybody wanted me to be part of their sort of next course. Anyway, so I was like, right, I rise to the challenge. We're going to do it. And we had to raise, I don't know, I can't remember the budget now, but I say it was 20 grand. But I said, right, we're going to get champagne sponsorship. We're going to get, a big person to come and open it. We're going to get press there. And we just made it happen. It was amazing.
Nice. Yeah. So I guess, you kind of figured out that you're a good leader, I guess, in a way. Not like a leader, but you're good at least bringing people together, I'd say.
Yeah. I do enjoy that.
Yeah.
It's all about the people. It has to be.
So you went on to MA.
Well, yeah, so that wasn't, again, on my radar. So we're having this private view, lots of people turn up, lots of press. We had a designer called Trisha Guild who opened it, gave a little speech. And there were certain people that wanted to go on to MA. I wasn't one of them. And Royal College went around and requested people to go and have interviews. And I was one of them. And again, so thought, okay, what have I got to lose? Let's go. Went for the interview, got the place. And so things just sort of happened for me.
Just like that. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, that's cool. That's like, I guess when it starts to feel natural, it feels natural.
Yeah, I was just extremely lucky. Now I look back on it and think, wow, what an opportunity that landed on my lap. But I quite like that. I wasn't one of those students that then turned up to Royal College with that pressure of, gosh, I've wanted to be here since I was 4, which was somebody who met me at the door. Or, my goodness, that pressure of getting through your BA to get here. No, just, let's just see what happens. But then in industry, if you told me that I'd go into teaching, I wouldn't, that was a big surprise too. So yeah, I think curveballs are really interesting, and you just got to go with the flow.
So I obviously, I kind of at a point I kind of started looking into design as a direction instead of art. So I guess a good question now for me is how do you differentiate the two?
Design function, art aesthetic. For me, it's quite clear cut.
Clear. Okay. All right. Well, I always kind of wondered, so if all design is art, how did I word it? I guess if all art is design, would you agree on that? Or would you say that because it's more, I guess I've always, especially because I remember some of the early contextual practices, we talk about this, and I was quite confused about what I'd say about what, and how I felt about each one, because I don't know if there's ever been like a blanket statement. It's kind of like, someone ask, from my personal experience, someone asks you when does a hill become a mountain? It's like, when does design become art? When does art become design? And I get really fascinated by recontextualizing things. Like, I think finding something that may be considered just like purely functional design, you can almost reinterpret or recontextualize in an artistic sense. And I guess I'm kind of curious, especially when it becomes like an in-depth discussion, almost like I don't know if that's like art theory almost, but like what would you say if in terms of design versus art? I mean, yeah, would you agree with where I'm coming across from, I guess, is a better question.
Well, I think my question to you is, what do you feel that do you feel that you're a designer or an artist?
I mean, I'm struggling to even identify with either. I've never really, the closest I've always been able to describe myself, especially considering the amount of work I bring out from different directions, is I've always kind of assumed to myself that I'm a creative, you know, and then that can entail anything. But like, you know, I think you can, because you can, it's all about kind of wording, I guess. It's like you can engineer something, you can design something, you can create something. And it's, at least for me, it's been fascinating, especially when I see such a broad spectrum of work coming from different people. And even from if we go to the development process, primary research, shall we say, and when you're researching a lot of the research that people pull from is design, which they then pull from to create art in a way, if that makes sense.
But I think you just answered your own question. Yeah. So it's like the experimentation, and also it's just a label, isn't it? So yes, you could question whether something is design or art, or when you're merging the boundaries, that's when it gets exciting.
So you would agree with where I'm coming from? Do you have like your own interpretation of that in terms of what you believe? What, you know, I can waffle on about recontextualization, but someone else will just be like, I don't see that, you know.
Oh no, I definitely agree with you. So we had this conversation before, whereas when I was working, I also had the title of creative because I've got different skill sets. And, you know, if someone's going to pay the bills, I can do it if I need to do it. Obviously, some skills better than others. But when you're working in industry, it's functional. So you're having to answer briefs, and you're getting paid to answer briefs. Yeah. When you're designing for yourself, you don't have to be as black and white. So, but essentially in fashion, you want somebody to wear what I do when I'm designing. I want somebody to wear it.
Yeah.
So then it is design.
Yeah. That's where, and that's a conversation we did have. I was quite harshly critical of someone who came in and said their opinion on, but yeah, getting I guess the outcome of, or at least what the maker wants to get out of it, is like a huge thing.
Which, when you are designing for yourself, or you've got a big budget or backer, you can really question. When you're in industry or someone's giving you the brief, you have to deliver.
Yeah.
So you have to answer you don't get those choices.
Yeah. Do you mind me asking, so how long ago was it when you were in industry?
Oh, I'm still in industry. So,
but in terms of sorry.
So how long have I been teaching, or?
No, as in, so when you were quote unquote a creative, the early days.
So I graduated 2000. So anytime from 2000, so 20 years.
Okay, and would you say? So your experience then to kind of the evolution of the experience now, what do you think there's been an evolution in terms of how the industry restricts or create, or like railroads an artist? You know, I don't know if there's like a good way to describe that outside of that, but like I've always wondered in terms of creative freedom, how much creative freedom does someone have within the industry, at least at the levels you've got experience with, and has that changed, do you think? I don't know.
And so we spoke about this sort of briefly last time, but that's the depending on who you work for and where you work, if they recognize your skill set, your talent, they want you to do just that, and generally it goes under somebody else's name because you're working at a design house or for a brand. But they will develop your talents because that makes them money. When you're working in the industry, it all comes down to money.
Yeah. I mean, this is, and I guess we can bring up something that I spoke about last time. So in comparison to because fashion I think is probably the more employable industry compared to just pure fine art in a way. So if we wanted to compare those and kind of talk about, are there restrictions in, at least would you know, in your opinion, do you think there's a restrictive sense of fine art in terms of if you are purely creating for the sake of, if there is a buyer, even if there is one, they are buying it because it's your work, not because, it's a certain style or if it's,
Well, this is a hard one because my brother went on and did a BA fine art actually. And he found it really difficult to get into industry. But I do think it's all to do with your personality, your perseverance, your network, and also your skill set. And sometimes, depending on what you studied within fine art, you have those capabilities and sometimes you don't. But equally, you could argue fashion is the same. So you have, and I was just discussing this with a friend recently, that it's not always the strongest students that do well. And the resilience, or when you're learning on the course, your skill sets expand, and that allows you to work your way into a good job as well. So it's not just the sort of high set of achievers. And sometimes you can enter the course. So you said that you came onto foundation, not, feeling a little bit overwhelmed with the other people's abilities. But now look at where you're at in such a short amount of time. Take that to your BA. And I think it's going to be really, really exciting to see that change. In you, I think you're just gathering momentum. Yeah,
I mean, it's fair to say I'm intimidated by the next, because foundation is such a short and quick chapter. I kind of, when I went into it, I was like, if it ever feels too much, it's only a year. It's only start in September. It's going to be done by May. And I've always consumed and had the foundation experience like that. So especially like moving on to BA, and especially moving on to what feels like a more narrow, with menswear being a bit more specific. And, I guess what would you say, the training wheels come off, I guess, so to speak. That's intimidating to me. That's something that's very much like, okay, what happens now? How in terms of like, I have a funny comparison. So when you first start going to the gym, within the first 3-4 months, if you're training consistently and hard enough, you see a lot of results in those first 3 or 4 months. And after a while, that curve starts to plateau. Yeah. And it's the same. And it's this. I mean, and I guess I'm curious more so. It feels like it will be the same. No, I think again that's your mindset. So my advice to you is you've got 3 years. Break it down. Knowing you and knowing how you reacted in foundation, just don't let it overwhelm you. So you're going in and you're just doing first year. So again, if you don't like first year or if something doesn't work for you, you just take the lesson and throw away the experience.
what have you learned from it? So thinking about your first year, thinking about the project, break it down little bit by little bit. And if, you'll set yourself out to work on the summer project, and then when you share and you see what people have done, then you'll sort of know where you're at and what you need to achieve and what you feel is successful, what was less successful. And that strives for you to learn and push yourself for the next project. And then you'll have different constraints, whether it's sponsored fabrics or working to a brief or working more independently. And they're all hurdles that you're going to learn along the way, which then gives you the experience to tackle the second year. And then, then you'll get to final year and you'll know how you want your collection to look. You would have, and hopefully you utilize your time to really experiment. There's no point churning out something that you can already do. So you want to push yourself. And on a project, I think, your first couple of projects, you want to bring your skills, but also try and push yourself in a different direction. And I think you'll do that really well because you're bringing that kind of maturity in, where you're thinking, okay, well, yeah, I know I can do this, but what happens if I added it to metal or wood and really sort of expanded on a material basis, or it could be silhouette, or, depending on the project that you're given. Just break it down.
Okay. Oh, yeah. That was you kind of almost answered what I was going to ask next, which is, so like foundation, very experimental, especially when I got comfortable, like I think around about, so when especially, I think it was literally by multiples projects, I felt like I kind of bedded in and was like, okay, cool, I've got this figured out. So like, yeah, as soon as part 2 started, I was kind of like, okay, now let's actively pursue the edges of the comfort zone. Let's try and let's experiment and stuff like that. This is funny enough, this is probably a better question for the BA tutors, but at least from your perspective, in terms of experiencing BA yourself and also being a person who releases the chicks, as to say, into the BA coop, how does experimentation change, I think, between foundation and then into BA, in terms of how it's either utilized or encouraged? I don't know, you tell me.
It doesn't really. So the more you experiment, but it's just the level of experimentation. I think the difference between foundation and BA Central St Martin's is the guidance of tutors. So you'll be briefed, you'll be given your project, and you will become an independent learner. You'll work on the project, you'll hopefully use your peers, and then you'll have a check-in, and then you'll have the crit. So it's about how you spend your days, how you navigate problems, how you resolve them. It's that learning aspect. But I've taught at Winchester BA quite a few years. I've also taught at Ravensbourne BA and LCF BA. So it goes back to those steps that I always bring up in class, where you have to, no matter what level you're at, you can always push yourself to learn and analyze and evaluate to move on to the next one. So I think really expanding on the brief, whenever you receive the brief, that's when you want to sort of note what you'll do initially, and then what you potentially could do. You've really pushed yourself. That will be really exciting if you did that for every project and made sure. But it's also about time management, because if you have some people who go in who absolutely want to commit and they work all the hours, but then they burn out. So it's also about understanding how much you can push yourself, how much, what triggers you, how you need to step back, and you can't go too fast, too hard at the beginning, in my opinion.
That's perfectly to kind of, so this is a question that I've kind of very, very much always struggled with. Someone who's, creative outside of, fashion. I enjoy making films, photography, stuff like that. One of the big things I always have is being overwhelmed by the idea process. You can have ideas all the time, popping in just, 10 minutes in the shower and you're like, whoa, Eureka, got another idea. Let's get on. In terms of like chasing ideas and developing ideas, and I guess in a way, revisiting ideas as well. What do you have a perspective about kind of like the incubation of an idea, when to let it grow, when you think you should limit yourself, or or go too head in and get overwhelmed by something, for example, or burnt out is another big thing. Is there anything you can chime in on in terms of the idea process and having ideas and what to do with them when you've got so many?
Yeah, it's about finding a framework, isn't it? So when you've got ideas, find an avenue that works for you where you can hold them like a holding pen. Because sometimes you have a great idea, but you just don't have the time or maybe the budget to be able to back it. But also with experience, you sort of sift out, you work out what will work well. Again, this comes back to values. So, is it quick fix? Do you want to make money? Or is it about pushing your skill set? Or is it about making your mark and making your name? So you've got to decide where you're pitching it.
Mm. And say we built like a space where there's no money constraints, there's no constraints on you producing a piece of work. It almost kind of reminds me of like when a film director has this is the one example I always hear about, because this is the only time I've heard about ideas sitting at the back. A lot of film directors will produce they'll produce their first piece of work, and it's very much kind of like work to get their name out, but in the back of their mind they have that story, that big move. And the director of Whiplash, I can't remember his name now, Damien Chazelle, he made a Whiplash short film, and then when he had the funding and the budget, he then made the full film, and it was 10 times better. But there's been examples of the opposite happening, where someone will make a short film that's successful, then they have all the budget in the world and they chuck it into it, and then they produce it and it just doesn't hit. I guess the same. I have the same question in terms of with fashion and art and everything like that. Do you think ideas deserve second chances, I guess, or do you think you can revisit in a public sense? So it's something as crazy. I don't know if a designer has ever done it, but has a design, is there space for a designer to literally just, I'm going to try that collection again?
Yeah, I think you learn so much. If you were to take a project that you've recently created on Foundation and do it again, do you think you'd get the same results knowing what you know now?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. I think, so
you're going to grow, you're going to strengthen, because you now know what you did, how you managed it, but also how your peers did, how they managed it. And you'll take that experience and it will strengthen you. So always revisit, always. But don't you do that within your personal life anyway? When you think, yeah, God, I tried that, it didn't work so well, I'm going to try it again. And you strengthen whatever it is you're trying to attack.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess to me, there feels like there's a difference. And I guess a lot of it is you'll get that gut feeling when you finish a project and you're like, okay, maybe that idea just didn't work out, I'm going to put it to rest, as opposed to, no, I'm not giving up on this idea, let's try again.
But then it's about analysing. So really sort of understanding, well, why didn't it work? And how, if I really want it to work, how am I going to make it work? What do I need to do in order to change that? But sometimes you can work on a project and you have a lot of energy for it, but it just doesn't work. This is also, I think, on the other flip side, knowing when to draw the line. Okay, so, I thought this was going to be a great project, or working with a different personality, and you think, yeah, this is going to be amazing. And actually it isn't, and you've wasted time or money. But then I took that up as a learning experience. It's like, okay, well, that didn't work so well, but next time I do it slightly differently.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if we put it in the context of Foundation, one of the things I remember being quite intimidating at least, I mean, not even just for me, but the whole course wide, there was this anxiety of like the difference between all of the projects we've done so far and then jumping into your final major project. Everyone was started referencing, they started chucking, it's a big deal that it got abbreviated. People are like, oh, the FMP's coming up. I'm like, what is an FMP? I've never, what?
Yeah, but I mean, so hopefully as a tutor, I can try and dispel that a little bit, because it's just another project. As a project, you get a longer amount of time to work on. But you have to put it all together. So you're not fed anything. You have to go out and resolve it all.
Yeah.
That's the only difference.
I think it's, like I kind of noticed the pattern I was falling into just starting out in part one. And I think it's a pattern I've brought from my kind of other creative experiences outside of foundation, which was leaving the good stuff and trying to work with the stuff that maybe not be as good. But on just like a silly scale, in terms of like even just like collage making, I print off a bunch of pictures, cut them up, and it's like, oh, those are really cool, interesting shapes, so I'm going to save them. I'm just going to work with the not so interesting shapes and see if I can make something out of it. And there was just this weird saving mindset that came out of nowhere. I don't really know exactly what I was saving it for.
Okay, that's really interesting. When you're eating your food, do you do the same? Do you save the better cuts of meat or whatever you've got on your plate?
I mean, yeah, I guess so. When I have my nan's roast dinner, I have the peas first and I'll save the Yorkshire pudding,
Yeah, okay, so that's just the way that you attack things. So analysing that, why is that? I think I was quite similar. And when my nan died, we were going through her affairs, and she had these beautiful white kid gloves that she'd never worn, that she'd kept for best. I wear them. I love them for that reason, because you think, well, anything can happen.
Yeah.
Just use it. And you can always try and, yes, you put something aside for a special day for something, but try and have that mindset of what's going to go wrong? What's going to happen if I use that today? Let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, funny enough, I think that's been the same with like, how like taking like my style, for example, when I'm at home and you kind of confined to just your local town, and the prying eyes of the local public is not quite as unjudgmental as, say, basically I use fashion as an excuse to come into foundation as an excuse to finally wear all the weird shit that I had. And it is that same, I guess it is that same mindset. And I mean, as I developed into foundation, I did break that down, where eventually I was like, nah, just use everything, get everything done there, get everything made. And especially when it came to like developing ideas, for me, you spend so much time thinking there's going to be a eureka moment at the beginning. It never is at the beginning. I think, especially with the function and performance projects, I think that's where it hit for me, where I kind of was like, oh, I'm doing a lot of chopping wood at the moment, so let's just make that my function. That'd be fun. And then performance, I was like, well, why do I chop wood? Oh, it's for my mental health. It makes you feel good. And that kind of and then that opened up the performance side of things as the broader exploration of mental health and balance and I guess mental growth. So that was literally decided within 10 minutes of reading the brief. And then that development, didn't have it until I think 1 week, a few days before making, where I had that eureka moment and being like, this is what I'm going to do actually. And it was realizing that that's almost entirely what the design process is for. So that why am I trying to kind of restrict myself already when I have the freedom to just jump into it?
Exactly that. That is an amazing revelation to come out of the project. Do what you enjoy. Don't struggle with any or sweat the small stuff. Just jump in and enjoy the experimentation. So you've got 3 years to really, yes, you have to answer briefs and you have to get through the assessments. But when you get a project, think, okay, what do I want to do? What could I do? And then see where you're at. Because don't put yourself in any boxes, no boundaries. Just thinking, oh, well, I know that this project happened or this designer did this, and so I've got an idea. try to obliterate that and think, okay, what happens if I curveball this? What happens if I, like that whole chopping wood? Brilliant, because you really thought about what makes you tick. And as a tutor, I love seeing that, because it wasn't just a really obvious reference. You actually delved in deeper into yourself. What value can I add to this? What is me? So you analysed it and you got more out of the project than if you had just thought, okay, function. Let's think. I want to go into menswear, because we've seen all of that before.
Yeah, I mean, even saying that, back then, I didn't even know if I wanted to be into menswear. So it kind of made that the fun part, especially with experimentation as well. I mean, there was the two courses I definitely had written off from the get-go was print and knit. But even then, like,
for what reason?
Don't like knitting, and as like face value, I understand that this is still CSM. There's loads of room for expression, but like the face value, I didn't want to be confined to printing, which I understand is not even the entire thing. But yeah,
that's really interesting, because I'd say with knitting, you've got hand knitting, machine knitting, but you have to use some sort of tool. I'd say that's the only sort of difference. Printing, well, I trained as a printer, but I wouldn't say I'm a printer in the sense that you're probably thinking of, because for my final show at Royal College, again, it was that challenge, that boundary of okay, so yeah, I know I can do silkscreen printing, or I can do heat transfer printing. I want to do that. Let's look at holographic printing. Let's look at something I can't get my hands on. Let's look at something pushing the boundaries. Let's look at lenticular printing. How does that happen? How much budget do you need? And finding that all out and thinking, yeah, and my tutor saying it's just not possible. You just won't be able to do it. Bingo. I'm going to find a way to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I have the same perspective going into menswear now. I think, like, at least for me, like when I kind of asked around, I did meticulous research, like talking to alumni, talking to people who were already on menswear, and talking to people in the course who had figured it out. They're like, yeah, I'm coming to this course, I'm going straight for menswear. I'm like, okay, cool. And what I kind of had gathered is that for me, like in terms of what I wanted to grow and what I wanted to develop and what I wanted to research, menswear felt like the space that would provide that the most efficiently, at least for what I wanted to do. And like I said, I brought up last time when literally, I think when I first had my tutorial, Dominic being like, oh yeah, you're going to do menswear, aren't you? I was like, no. And they're like, FTC? I was like, no, I was thinking women's wear. It's like, oh, okay. And I was like, okay, so if I'm producing work for these and didn't even realize, maybe I should find out more, I guess. But yeah, that was an interesting experience, spending the whole of, and I'm glad I had foundation to find out in the first place, but spending the whole of foundation to find out what should be the space to spend my next, 4 years in.
Yeah.
3.
Yeah, 3, 4. But you'll find, I mean, even at the end, yes, you would have got a specialism in menswear. But if somebody came along and gave you a great job at a fashion house that wasn't necessarily menswear, would you take it?
Yeah, I mean, it's even now, it's like thinking about like the initial projects and stuff like that. And speaking to friends, it's like, I don't want to make a menswear garment. I don't really want to do that. I still think in terms of when I instinctively, when I think about putting anything on the body, it's the female body, because I feel like, at least for me, there's just less restriction in terms of how expansive you can be. But then even then, that's something that I can break away from. But yeah, I think.
But again, is that sort of what is the restriction? I mean, I know there's talk at BA to why is there a menswear course? Why is there a women's wear course? And it's quite sort of old school thinking.
Yeah.
If you're designing for a different body shapes, it should be, you should be thinking about diversity, but also non-gender. Could it be unisex?
Yeah.
I like it when you see designers think about generation. So, you could have something and your grandpa could also have something, and how you wear it, but you wear it differently.
Yeah.
Or when you grow, the garment grows
with you. Yeah. I know the exact I can't remember the name of the brand who's been doing that. They did it with it's like origami, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's I mean, and this opens up a whole thing in terms of kind of gender identity and something, at least, because like my traditional thinking is like, I want to make dresses. Girls normally wear dresses. Boom, so, but then at the same time, you start to ride an interesting wave, and this is something I've always heard recently, and this is something that's provoked by the industry, especially in like a day and age where you've got this ridiculous divide between people who want to be really progressive, and they want to do, they want to just, and I'm this is me being part of that group. I love the idea of having completely genderless fashion where the form and the silhouette are just purely down to create. There's no preconceived traditional stylings. It's purely brand new and abstract and bonkers and whatever. But there's also, there are the traditionalists. There is still a traditional design process. And the industry provokes this where you do get this like kind of, at least for like, in terms of a man that's into fashion, I've realized that there is kind of a shock value and a gimmick value that the industry knows how to make money off, Mm-hmm. I think the earliest example was, I think it was Jane Smith did something for women's wear at Louis Vuitton, and that should, in my eyes, should already be 100% normalized. That should just be something that's like, yeah, that's of course. But I think there's like a weird thing where it starts to feel more of a statement and a provocative, like, hey, look at this. This is a person who's wearing clothes that shouldn't be, because they're that's a man in a skirt, or that's a woman in a suit, and it's like, whoa, it's this. It creates. I think especially, and this is funny enough, a discussion I did want to have, and I didn't know how much you could or want to pitch in about, but talking about kind of like the ages of fashion and when fashion's been a bit more of, has there been a prime time? But I've been watching this guy on YouTube at the moment. He's been deconstructing how, gimmicks have carried the industry recently, because it's all about press. It's all about marketing. It's all a huge thing where it's like, I mean, maybe as recently, I don't know how connected you are to see the big red boots, the big red Astro boots, and what, I thought they were great, but there's people who are like, this is stupid, fashion's gone too far, it's a scam. But then that outrage then builds the press up, and it becomes this interesting thing. And it is, gimmicks have been in the limelight for that. Gender's been in the limelight for that. I guess the question that I guess I'm trying to ask, or at least want you to pitch in on, is, I guess, where do you stand with the future of that, or if you think that's all part of it and is necessary, or I guess
there's always going to be the fashion circus, isn't there? There's always going to be the gimmicks. There's always going to be some. I mean, because it is the fashion frenzy. It sells papers. It then sells, and that is part of fashion. But you have to decide whether that's part of something you want to design for, be part of, or not. And down to aesthetics, but also choices. Personally not. But it's never going to go away. So, but like anything, then I'm very much, if that's what that person wants to do, let them carry on. If they're happy, that's their thing. But I don't like the gimmicks per se. But I understand that it needs to be there, and it's part of the system. Tailoring and skill set, I think the more that you learn on your BA and you push yourself, and then with the thinking and the questioning and with your cohort, is about sort of strengthening your skills and then subverting them, really turning them on their head. And then, so you're told, in tailoring, this is how you construct something. Well, then it's about thinking, well, okay, and I will do it, what happens if I didn't do that and I were to use different material, and you say that it's not possible because this is too malleable or too rigid? Oh, let's just see what happens, and really push the boundaries. Yeah, gimmick, but a gimmick will always be there.
And you think they're gimmicks? You do see, in terms of, do they evolve anything for like an industrial? Like, how different is, say on the spray on Alexander McQueen dress? Like, that's the earliest gimmick I can think of, to kind of, I think it was last season with the robot, or Bella Hadid literally wearing a spray on dress. Like, that felt to me as if it's like, okay, so the gimmick has plateaued. There's never really been. Have we actually evolved this, or has this always just been a marketing thing? Like, do you think there is an evolution that comes out of it?
Well, no, I think so. It's changing as in different skill sets. So this comes back to sort of, do you call yourself a menswear designer, creative? It's those multiple skills. So I think fashion is becoming more entwined with marketing. And so fashion shows are an immersive event. If you think about the butterflies or multiple different.
I think I like that. Look, I like that.
Yeah. So, but it's an event, and it's to get you there, and so it gets you off the screen, and it's immersive. And I think exhibitions are going that way too, so that you have that footfall and you have that personal experience. But that's not fashion. That's the event.
Yeah.
And for me, they're separate.
Okay.
So yes, they bring people in. It's like the window shopping, but it's not the crux of the collection. When I was at Royal College, there was a designer who was creating, I don't know if I told you this, the spray on fabric.
Yeah.
And then they went off and did a PhD. But it was about then taking it off into different streams, and they went down a medical route. I think it's quite interesting how just because it starts off in fashion doesn't have to stay in fashion.
Yeah.
And the different routes, and that's who you mix with and who you meet along the way. We had someone really interesting come in to talk to us from NASA, and I explained about how they were developing a fabric, and that they'd gone to the South Pole, and they were looking at penguins, and from analysing and taking samples and research into the skin and the blubber, and that's how they created this fabric that they were introducing to us. I found that fascinating. And yeah, for me, the cross-fertilization. So yes, we're studying fashion, but when I'm saying push the boundaries, like, you can go anywhere with what you're learning skill, but it could take you anywhere. You decide.
Yeah.
And that's, for me, doing a foundation at Central St Martin's or a degree, it's about the people that you're meeting, and they're pushing their boundaries, and it's not kind of clear cut, and it's subverting it and experimenting to the next level.
Yeah. See, now I kind of want to go two directions of this conversation now, because I really like the fashion industry taking from other places or expanding into, go. I can't remember how you said it, but in terms of like fashion leading to something, or something leading to fashion, I get really fascinated by something that could eventually be, and I guess this comes into the recontextualization world of like, oh yeah, that can then just be
the cross-fertilization.
Cross-fertilization is the word you use, which I thought was, that's really like interesting to me, because like, I guess I think a lot about where fashion is, at least where we're producing work. I have an example recently. I was speaking to a friend of mine at the pub, and I've got friends who are very, they're more academically inclined. They work engineering jobs. They're very much like regimented to think like that, and that's fine. And I love them for that, and that's fine. But there's always an interesting thing. So they were talking about, so they're like, oh, so what's the first thing that happens in menswear? And I talk about the white show, for example. I was like, oh yeah, it's like this show where everything has to be white, but apart from that, you can make what you want. And it was funny trying, because he had this instant perspective of like, okay, so like what there he was imagining white t-shirt, shorts and shoes, and like this is going to be something that like is the fact that we think about the target market and we're thinking about kind of that level. And it's like, no, like I showed him Sunny from Eileen from last year,
yeah,
and her big ring dress thing. I thought was really cool. So I was like, no, this is the sort of thing. And he was like, oh, and I guess like this is something that because fashion, at least from like I'll say normal people, but from people who aren't interested in fashion, can very much feel like a circus. There is, and we we know this, we encourage this almost. It's like part of like, oh yeah, we will lean into it. But it eventually but everything seems to eventually water itself down to one point being the norm. I guess if there's something, it's the same as like cars and the development process of making a car. You get this really flashy, bonkers, impractical concept car, one of one. It's all the shows and stuff. And then eventually it gets condensed down till it's this barely, maybe stylistically slightly, the same idea that's been condensed down to be consumed by a consumer level. And I guess I've always been trying to compare that, and that's how I've been trying to explain what, at least where I'm trying to remain and where I feel like CSM does as an institute, is sit on that fringe of like I guess the next big thing or the next big idea that eventually will be bloop, 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 bloop down until,
Yeah, totally. Do you want to be on a course that allows you to be a creative director, or do you want to be on a course that you create for a commercial level? That's the decider.
I guess, yeah. There is at least, that's an observation I make, that you would say is, oh yeah, of course there is like layers that drops down. And yeah, I mean, it is the same as just comparing a friend, even someone as different as, not too far, as a sister institute, LCF, not too far different to us, but they're, within the first week they had the sewing machines out and they were working, and we were still, sticking and colouring and,
But we're expanding different skill sets though. So as teaching at LCF as well, when you leave LCF, you can very much walk into a job in the high street or high end, jump on a machine, and you have the confidence to cut and depending on passing, cutting, making, you're very hands-on, but you are not always, but you follow directions, or you can follow them very well until you get the experience to move yourself up.
Yeah.
Whereas I'd say with Central St. Martin's, you have that growth, expertise and experimentation that you can, hopefully you've learnt those skills along the way, so you can use the machines and or you bring your tailoring aspect, but you've got the bigger picture.
Yeah. I think what's good analogy, maybe this is, but it's like the difference between knowing how to make a pair of trousers to then knowing, finding a way to make a pair, like to completely redo the idea of a trouser, I guess, is almost.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's sort of the basis of the deconstruction project. Remember from part one, when you know how something is made, then you have the ability to push the boundaries. Or otherwise, we could teach you how to make a garment, but all you'll know is how to make the garment. So yeah, it's sort of about that growth mindset.
Yeah, I guess it kind of falls into the modern art and the how easily modern art gets shilled, like gets made fun of at this day and age, because it's something as silly as DSM having giant white balls in the main lobby, and it's not a Renaissance painting, and it's that difference of like expression and skill, I guess, being confused. My friend Callum, like he sits on that fringe where I love what he does because it's very playful, it's childlike, and it's ridiculous, and makes me think of the film. Have you seen French Dispatch?
No.
So that's quite. I mean, that's quite a good example of. It's about a painting that gets sold. Some prisoner makes this painting, and it's the first. It's like it's introduced into a world where everyone's like, oh yeah, we buy landscape paintings and real still life and portraits and stuff. And it was this very blurry pink painting of it, and it was called The Lady. But you look at it and you really had to look at it to even figure out if there's a lady there. And there's this comparison that the art seller, the guy who buys the painting to then sell on, he makes this comparison about how it's like the artist ask him to draw a bird, and he'll draw the best bird ever, and it will look amazing. But then this is the work he would rather produce. And it's always like, I get that in a sense, but that's also not diminishing the fact that people can produce work without the skill set in the first place. That's really provocative. But I guess I think what I almost had to learn for myself here is that it's not about kind of the skill level of the production of work. You're not trying to create something that's like an idea in your head, not like an idea. And I'm struggling with the words with this, but like you have your own restrictions creatively, where you think you have to make something a certain way, but then you can just draw or just create or put fabric together and just not even think about it, just put it together and see what feels right. And they're very different things. And I guess that's something like.
Yeah, I mean, you could have finished foundation from making something out of paper. You didn't even have to touch fabric if you didn't want to. It's a process. You've got to show the process, and you've got to show the development.
Yeah. I think like one of my favorite descriptions is that at no point, I mean, there is obviously the term of like garment making and garment design and stuff like that, but I've never really contextualized it in a way that when we make things, you talk about it being on the body. You never talk about it being worn. Which I think is really, that's so like, even just hearing it in that context is like, you completely change the way you think about the design process then, and that's really exciting. I think when I first heard that being used as, oh yeah, we're not even thinking about being on the body, but when it is on the body, it's on the body. It's not like, oh yeah, we're not thinking about how do you wear this piece. It's like, how will this piece look on the body? The body is the canvas, that made it really fun because I mean, I did a lot of research coming into this course, but there was always one thing that intimidated me about fashion school and art school and anything like that is the fact that, I've learned how to sew, I've got a sewing machine, I've learned how to do that, but like, I don't feel proficient or comfortable in it. And especially like doing that little short course and then speaking to like tutors during it was when they had the open days, but because it was COVID, it was like online. So you typed in like a Q&A thing. And like my top question was like, I don't know what can I be considered even if like I just don't have any experience, I guess, skill set.
But you would have put a portfolio together. And you would have been chosen from your portfolio. So you don't necessarily identify that you had a skill set, but you would have had some drawing capability, colour sense, even using the layout and composition on the page. All of that is considered. It's not just the execution of the final outcome, it's everything.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I eventually learned to grow from. And now, like, even now, it's like, I guess one of the more intimidating parts of the process for me was always sample making. Like, I just was like, how on earth am I going to put together a sample, for example?
But why though? Because think of the sample that went up in the exhibition.
Yeah, well, that sample was birthed from the fact that, okay, I don't have a conventional skill set to make, there's people making these great knit samples. I was always intimidated by, the people who were clearly like, okay, we're going to be moving to knit next year, or we're going to be moving to women's wear next year. And they had these crazy samples that they'd spent meticulous, you come in every morning and they're on the same sample. They've been putting it together for 3 weeks. And I'm like, one, I don't have the patience for that. And two, I'm like, I don't even know how I'd do that if I did have the patience for that. So.
But I mean, hopefully the course has taught you that we don't want versions of. We don't want, so if somebody's doing that, great, you want to celebrate them. That's amazing. Let them do their thing. What's your thing?
Yeah, no, that's it. That's literally what Foundation has felt for me. It's been not finding how to be like everyone else, but how to fit into your own and kind of
and celebrate yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I'm almost less inclined. I think I remember speaking to you because one of my things I was worried about in the interview was asking about galleries, and I don't particularly, or almost at a point I deliberately avoided galleries. I still I like to go to one specific ones that I think would benefit me, but compared to friends, and especially like when you connect with everyone, you can see on Instagram people are at galleries all the time, and I'm like, oh my god,
But again, is that what you feel? You feel, it's something that you think, well, I don't particularly enjoy it, I don't do a lot of, and then it's on your radar, isn't it? So then you think, oh gosh, and that overwhelming feeling of, well, they're doing something I need to be doing, but I'm not doing it. So fine, if that's not your thing, we'll look it up online, find a different way to do it. Or, even in this conversation, you're talking about friends who've got engineering backgrounds, or you've got a friend who's an artist. And because you're coming in at a different level, you've already got that at your fingertips. What can you utilize from that? And yes, I go to exhibitions and galleries quite often, but because then I can reference and push students to go and see. And I don't go there to necessarily think, oh, what am I going to take from this? But might be a piece of the description, or it could be the composition of the gallery. It could be the way that things have been executed. You don't necessarily go for one thing. But where do you have to hunt and gather, and there's different ways of doing it. But also I would say, hopefully you wrote your skills audit, things that you think that you can accomplish and do really well. So you want to look at that, and you just want to keep that ticking. So you want that consistency, so a little bit every day. Then I want you to write a list of things that you think, oh, I'm not so good at. So 2 already that I know that I would like you to push is drawing, experimental drawing, different ways, different scales, different materials, blind drawing. It's not just observational drawing, like really push the boundaries. But also now sample making, because if that's something where you're thinking, oh, okay, you look at them, that comes from a place of uncertainty or questioning why. So then give yourself a couple of days to make some samples, just kind of gather different materials and try and work them together. Or think about skill sets and think about, okay, so I don't like printing, but how could I change the way that I print? Or could I do block printing? Could I take the wood? Or could I emboss? Could I use heat?
That's something. And that's when I think I got more excited by the exploration of completely like recontextualizing stuff and building from really unconventional and unorthodox perspectives, because I had that freedom where I was like, well, I don't really know how I can get into that sort of thing. So let's take this and run with it, which I think has been a lot of the process for me, where instead of conforming, I think that was the main thing I was kind of worried about, where I'd be like, I would regiment myself and conform to this idea of what I think I should be when I started the course. I was like, okay, I want to finish this course like this sort of person. But since then, it's been more of running with what makes me different, I guess, and what and I guess and obviously at the end of the day, it's what's the most passionate, what has the most passion behind it. I'm always going to be reluctant to do knit because there's not much passion behind it, but
again, analysing, why is that?
Exactly.
Is it the machines? I mean, it's quite technical. Is it the yarns? Is it the fact that you have to then concentrate? Is it all of those things combined? I mean, I don't love knitting, but I like to be in control. Mm-hmm. And in knitting, I feel like then if I've lost a stitch or I haven't quite followed the technique, then it really grates me. So it definitely isn't one for me. But I celebrate my friends who have that skill. Yeah, it's just, you got to go out there and try it all. And then, but also when you know you don't like it, why?
Yeah.
and pushing them.
Yeah, I mean, I think something I figured out is like a lot of the stuff that I produce and make, and where I feel like I at least produce the best is under not like a time constraint, but under the fact that I want to get this idea on the paper now, and I want to get it, and whatever happens, happens. There's very much kind of my perspective to the design process, and what kind of got me through to a comfortable place with producing the samples, where, okay, I'm intimidated by samples because, they freaks me out that you can spend a lot of time on a sample that may not be successful. And that was in the back of my mind, especially when we're in a course where, each project's a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks if you're lucky. That was something I was kind of considerate of. But at the same time, it was like, I think part of me is worried if I spend too much time producing or developing an idea, it gives me time to fall out of love with the idea.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, this comes to that overwhelming feeling of joining foundation. There's a repetitive pattern here, I think. So give yourself a day to make some samples, but then break it down to hours. So, you've got an hour to work with one type of material. How many different ways? What can you do with it? Then you've got yourself another hour to work with pushing those boundaries of things that were successful. And then you want to kind of introduce something completely new, and then analyze where you are at the end of it. And
yeah,
just because, so I'm feeling like the conversation we had where you're saying, well, how do you know when something's finished? Or, if I've just thought of something really quickly. Same with samples, really. So sometimes I've sold something that I have made so quickly. And great, if there's a buyer for that, brilliant. They don't, I could have been cultivating subconsciously that idea and just didn't know it. And then sometimes you labor on something and you don't sell it as quickly. Yeah, it's sort of, but the more you experiment, the more you push yourself, I think it's all going to sort of start to fall into place.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating to me. I think it's so fascinating to kind of think about how, like, I mean, you could be so in your head about something, and especially this is when like an outside, like a buyer comes in and changes that completely, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, I just made this, but then it doesn't matter.
But then it's value. So, what do you value? So you could have, do you want to keep it? Do you want to sell it? Is it worth something? What's the... and yes, for you, it's maybe something you've quickly constructed, but somebody else might come along, a very wealthy person, or emotionally attached as well. Just it depends the value, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it reminds me of this. Oh, this is a really funny moment of like, oh, this is art school. I was sitting, I think it was like part 2. No, it was part 1. We were upstairs, and I can't remember who it was, but she was producing some work, and it was just during the sample making process, I think, and there's a pile of fabric and materials sitting there, and she just kind of tried that to the side, and she was focusing on her own one. And I remember Gail walks past, points to the pile, and is like, that's really interesting, that is, I like that. And I just was instantly like, oh, of course, this is amazing. And that is almost instantly, that like exchange alone had sprung something in me, where I think there's even something like, there's a particular in our room upstairs, there's a nice, well, I say it's nice and white, it's all a bit battered, but there's one like dark ink stain. I don't know if you've ever noticed it, but there's a dark ink stain, like just like probably about like 2 feet off the floor, and it's dripped down, and a bit of it's on the floor as well. And it's been there the whole time, and I'm like, that's sick. And I love it. And it's always been that, and I guess that's opened up for me what's like the fun and exciting part about having multiple people look at things, and I guess creating a context around anything that exists. And Yeah, I think it further just solidifies at least my personal philosophy on it, but also it's fun to realize that, you know, I could be producing an idea, not be particularly happy with it, and then when it comes out and someone else looks at it, it's like, this is perfect, you know, this is amazing. But you know, all it takes is one person to identify with it in a certain way, because you know, at the end of the day, like, at least I feel like where we are with the work we're producing now, no one's going to look at a piece and, I mean, or at least 9 out of 10 people, you know, see a producer, someone who's really abstract or something like that. Utetsu working with luck, for example, as this project theme. I was like, what are you doing, Utetsu? This is ridiculous. You're carrying the heaviest weight. And no one, and the scene, even just this, I remember looking at his collages and stuff and being like, there is no way I would get luck from this, but I'm getting my own thing. You know, I really like Utetsu's work, and I was looking at this work and I was like, oh, okay, I'm getting something else from it. And I do find that quite exciting, that's what art is, but that's also what fashion is as well.
Catalyst.
Yeah.
He just needed a starting point. We definitely knew that his collection wouldn't look lucky.
Yeah. I mean, how does, you know, it's not going to be like 4-leaf clovers and very on the nose. And I mean, that's the hilarious thing about being at CSM, and I guess in fashion in general is trying our best to not be on the nose about anything. We want it to be hard, you know, in a way. We want it to be touching a certain area. I kind of recently so I've been making kind of like documentary style films for a while, my hiking and stuff like that. But recently, so the film I submitted to the CSM cinema thing, I kind of wanted to put a bit more of myself into the project without trying to handhold anyone to kind of understand with a bit of narration or anything like that. Or, you know, fancy transitions or anything for people to understand it. I completely just stripped back the design process and was like, I just started building it. And this is something I kind of produce a lot of my work by anyway, which intimidated me about design, development and fashion, is because a lot of the work I make, I have like a rough idea, especially with editing and filming, but I always work with what I have and just produce and just make and see what goes together. And it is that thing where, so when I made it for Cinema CSM, I found myself almost avoiding the plan process and just being like, what do I feel like would happen next that would work? And, you know, some things backfired. I really like to have, I had the space in the middle. I just wanted a space where the viewer sat with it for about 5 seconds of just blank screen, no sound. I was like, just sit there for a little bit before the next part starts. And during the screening, everyone's like, oh, it's over. It starts clapping. I was like, no, it's not done. And I was like, but then, you know, now I can say I got two rounds of applause out of it. But, but no, like I like that unapologetic perspective with all art, where it's just unapologetic. It makes it difficult to consume. I think it's the reason I do still quite like a lot of like where fashion is we're so far gone with a lot of the concepts and a lot of the bonker stuff. It's why I kind of like how stupid the red Astro boots were, because a lot of people are gonna be like, this is stupid. And I'm like, exactly, that's why it's so good, you know? Or it's like, but you know, Balenciaga does a lot of it. I was on the bandwagon earlier where I was like, oh, Balenciaga are ridiculous. They're selling thousands of pounds worth of dirty jeans, and you know, it's the new version of the classic. These jeans have rips in. Why would you buy them? You know. But now it's like, oh no, that's great. You know, I love, like, that's so cool that they just rebranded that whole thing. I think Jack was literally sending me yesterday who was, I think it was Martine Rose, someone. But the latest collection is just Hiver's like workwear, and I love that. Like, I'm obsessed with that. I think that's so because it's what you see every day. You're always going to see a tradie in some work trousers. So it's like, why don't we look at this in a different light?
But you've always been interested in concepts, and I think you will definitely develop that over the next 3-4 years.
Yeah, I've gone on a tangent to the point. I wanted to come back to a point that I was previously talking about, but I've lost it now. But I guess and this is this is the design process for me. I'm gone, I'm gone. It was quite funny recently. So Selena watched my short film and she'd messaged me recently being like, so how do you develop a script? I haven't I've wrote scripts for like 2 short films.
Mm-hmm.
Neither of those short films ever even came out. They're just sitting on the cutting room floor at the moment. But she was like, how do you develop a script? I was like, I just literally, I get the footage and I'm just seeing what happens. I don't have that early stage.
But that's great though, because then you're working with your gut and your intuition. So you've built on that. You've got to, whereas I think somebody might be coming from it from the point of view of, this is overwhelming. I don't know what to do. Do you have to write a list? Do I have to work with a framework? What's the script? How do I get from A to B? Yeah, I think that's quite interesting. But yeah, if you were to give Selena some yarn, some knit, she'd be well away.
Oh yeah, I mean she was one of many who just, when I first started seeing things, I was like, oh no, what is going? Like, it took me a while. I remember part 1, go around like the international students, the home students. I remember seeing, because she still pisses me off over it, Laura's work. I'm like, she's always someone who I've been like, fuck no. I've got like, when I found out that she struggled with her women's wear interview, I mean, she still managed to get women's wear, but like when she even struggled with the interview, I was like terrified, because I was like, oh my God, if she struggled with it. And her work is so strong, and like I love because she has the skill, like if you could commission someone, if I could be like, oh, I have this idea, but can you do my sketchbook for me? I'd make Laura do it. But then it's the same with, Selena. I could name drop so many people. You just going around and looking at people producing this work that's so bonkers, and just, yeah, like I think especially, and I guess this is last thing I want to touch on, is like insecurity and ego in the industry. Mm-hmm. I think is huge. I think for fashion, probably over every other pathway. Maybe it's hard for me to. I mean, maybe I don't know architects. Maybe they're like, oh no, that building looks a lot cooler than my building. But like fine art seems to be more, at least from how I've seen it, it's more about identity. I think when fine art starts comparing skill, then they've missed the point of the fine art. But fashion, there is this, there are these moments, and I think it took me a while to find a balance between the two, because you can be in one basket, you can be this person who's completely ignorant and like, my work is the best work, and if no one likes it, they clearly don't understand it. You can have that type of person.
Do you think we had that type of person
on this course? Who knows? Maybe. But I would like to say I pretty much loved every engagement I had with anyone here. I found everyone fascinating, 99% of the time, mm-hmm. And. But I mean, I think even in the wider spectrum of the entire industry, I think in terms of at least what I think, like even like areas produce, or what I found kind of jarring about kind of certain like networking events and opportunities is you do talk to people where you can almost tell by the way that they hold themselves that they're okay, this is that type of person who's looking for this, and they care about this, and this is what they think of themselves, and they're not regarding much else. But then you also have the people who are the other end of the scale. But yeah, like this course has been really cool because I've seen both. I did come into CSM thinking, when I learned what CSM was, I was like, oh, it's going to be full of arseholes. It's going to be full of these people who are like, being fun, like they've got all the funding and all of the self-confidence, and they've been held at the highest regard their entire life. So they're going to come into this being like, I'm the big deal. I'm going to produce the best work. But then being, there are still going to be people who are close to that, but there's fascination in finding people who are insecure, and it kind of makes you feel a little bit safer. I just find the whole dynamic quite fascinating. I think having someone so kind of like, I think Tate was always a good example. I thought Tate was like producing the coolest portfolio I'd ever seen, but she was so insecure and meticulous about it that she was like, I don't know if I like this, and then just trying to move all these little bits. And I was really kind of finding it almost difficult to watch, to be like seeing someone struggle. But it was this moment where I was like, okay, if they're insecure, then, you know, that's just being human. And so my insecurity, yeah, I'm allowed to still feel like that, but like, I don't know, and this almost falls into...
But hang on, is it insecurities or is it understanding? So...
Well, that's the thing, like, it's kind of, it's almost a psychological, like, it's more psychological than a creative topic, but it's finding that balance between, I don't know, maybe it's more about vulnerability. You know, I think... and
would you say that maybe when you first started, first week, you felt quite vulnerable because you weren't sure what to expect? It was all quite overwhelming. And then as it was broken down, your confidence just grew and grew. So then, and with that, you definitely developed, you know, it's kind of goes hand in hand. And, you know, as you're pointing out, different peers, they all come from different backgrounds. So they've all had slightly different upbringings or education, and it all impacts your thinking. But it's really interesting because there's a previous conversation where you've said, you know, gosh, they're quite confident. And that's the way that you've perceived them.
Yeah.
But actually, as a tutor, I know otherwise.
Exactly.
And that's fascinating. But again, that's your personal journey to unravel of, you know, if you feel like that, why? If you see them sort of acting that way, why?
I mean, yeah, and I guess this is the space. I think foundation and the next and BA and the educational space is the space to let that balance itself out. And
you've got the support. I mean, when you're in the education, you've got the network there, so utilize it.
What I guess the last thing I want to say is, so what in terms of these being set free from this, you know, the next steps beyond BA, or even if someone never went into BA, or it's just, I guess when you're in the actual space, the creative space, the industry space, that you're amongst people who have, you know, they've found their footing, they've got their jobs, they're doing their part. What do you think is kind of like, I mean, do you think there's a problem there in terms of ego? Do you think there is?
You're always, no matter what job you go into, you're always going to have different egos. You're always going to have an alpha. Doesn't matter whatever situation. I would just say you've got to do what makes, it's a real cliche, but you've got to do what makes you happy. You've got to be surrounded by like-minded people. And doesn't matter where you are, what you're doing. I think it's as simple as that.
And would you say, I mean, I guess, you know, because ego is a scary thing. I think people, when someone gets told that they have an ego, it hurts because it's oh wow, I'm not who I think I am. You know, we can also, I've gone in, this is something that comes up in a lot of my episodes actually, which is the aspect of like the death of an ego and stuff like that. How necessary do you think an ego is, in terms of not in the perspective of like, oh, he's got an ego, so he's an asshole, or they've got an ego, so they're in their own little world. In terms of, I guess, seeing ego as more of a confidence thing, how important do you think that is to kind of the future of a creative, you know, in their life? Like, when's the line from being too confident? You know, is there a line in the first place? Is a little bit of insecurity essential?
I think yes, because it makes you humble. You know, I think it's good to show, and I think it's good, you know, sort of. I'd love you to ask that question to each tutor, manager you meet, you know, along the way, along your journey, because I think people would have very different answers.
Yeah.
I'm not a particularly confident person. I am and I'm not. It depends. In some aspects I really am, and in others I'm not. And I think, but we've had this conversation before that in industry, you can work with a team that you really despise, or you can work on a project that, you're doing it for reasons. It's about values and working out what's important to you, and then reassessing where you're at. For me, it's not working for big names or working with ourselves. It's which is then, it helps define your direction. But also for me, and I when I was in industry, I loved it. I got to travel the world. I got budgets to spend. It was amazing. So I'm talking in retrospect. And at the time, that was brilliant. But then my values changed and I wanted different things.
I think a lot of it does come down to value. It's just something I'm going to be wrestling with, which is kind of, because already within this period of kind of at least being more secure in my creativity, especially after years of kind of giving up on it and returning to it and finding myself again, and finding that it is a constant wrestling match between, letting yourself feel insecure and vulnerable, but safe. I think, to quote what I said in my mentor interview, one of the things I want to do in terms of when creating and being in fashion is to create. It's just to create a safe space.
Yeah,
and it's
amazing.
So essential, at least for me, to feel like I can develop within it, but also to invite people into a space like that to kind of, I don't know, see what I see. But I don't know. I think it's been a really exciting foundation experience for that. I'm so grateful. I remember finding out what tutor we're going to get for part 2, and I was like, oh, Victoria, this would be great. We it's just because I've always never been. I think you've been very good at balance in terms of how, at least I feel like at my age, and kind of, I've really tried not to wear my creative heart on my sleeve, so I can really take critique when I feel like it's like critique at the best interest of me. Because obviously, I do worry there's times when you can get critique, even if it's from peers, or even worse, if it's from like a tutor, where you do feel like there is a ulterior motive to the critique. But I've never felt like there's been a particular reason. Like, I don't think you've ever been like, I don't like that just because of my own personal opinion. And
no, never. Because exactly. What do you learn from that?
Exactly. And I think everything that we've, I guess I attribute a lot of this kind of coming of confidence to you. And, even just the small exchanges when your vet's busy and about, and she'll be like, ooh, ooh, ooh. I remember her kind of looking through my last sketchbook being like, looks like you had fun. And I'm like, well, that's what I've tried to do this whole time, is to try and actually enjoy it. I didn't ever want to be, if I was going to be, staying up at 4 a.m. crying over feedback, then I'm just like, this is not, I'm going to go. It's not for me.
And I think if you reach that stage, then you've got to reevaluate. Nobody wants to be at that stage.
Yeah. As intense the whole thing got, it was 10 times better than, having a customer shout down to you on the phone and a job you hated. Like, this is as intense as this. I mean, even then, I think when we spoke about last week, this, I was aware that foundation and obviously the whole institute as a whole gets a rep for being intense, and at least not as intense as it probably once was. But
it is intense. And I was at a private view last week at Camberwell, and one of the tutors, there was an Italian mother and daughter, and they were asking the difference between Camberwell Foundation and CSM Foundation. And the tutor said, well, CSM's really intense. Here, we're more like a family. Okay. That's interesting. I wasn't wearing my badge at the time, but But it is what you make it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like you just said. So it could have been an extremely intense course if you let it. But
it's
that's
perspective a lot of the time as well, you know. Like I think that I'm big on perspective. I always have been. So kind of looking at this almost as therapy has been the kind of most rewarding for me, because it has been like everything I'm doing here is for me.
Great.
You know, and that's kind of what got me through it. Yeah.
Good for you. I mean, I cannot wait to see what you do on BA.
Well, I mean, that's another. That's my very final question. So you say you go to galleries and you go to shows and stuff like that. Do you follow up on your alumni? Do you go up and check their work out?
Of course.
That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just a stepping stone, right? So the fact that I can make that connection, and I love foundation for this, because you do like an A level or equivalent, and it very much is a project. And then we start to open your eyes and push the boundaries and really experiment on foundation. It's just the beginning. It's quite short, even though intense. And then on BA, you start finding your feet. And even to the point where students, you know, have their hair cut and they just slowly, they become more confident.
Oh, yeah.
And you know,
you see them.
Yeah, even from beginning foundation to the end of foundation, you can see that. But over the period of degree. And, you know, some of them have really pushed themselves and experimented, and you think, God, wow, this is amazing. Some of them, you know, haven't really changed that much. And you think, okay, well, there's still a place for you in industry, although sometimes I'm disappointed with that. And you think, well, this was the time when you have no restraints, you could do anything. But then you don't know what personal journey they're on as well. So, but you'll see on my Instagram, I love keeping contact with students because then they go off into industry, and on LinkedIn as well, you'll see that students I was teaching 10, 15 years ago, you know, now sort of moved up the chain. And if I can then make the connection, I love it. I mean, that the value added there for me is amazing, because if I've had someone that I taught, say, 15 years ago, and then I've got someone on foundation, I can put that together. I don't know if you spoke to Jack, there was something I saw and I said, oh, make that happen. Yeah, because that's something I can do. And it's, instant, easy, and so beneficial. Yeah.
I mean, I guess without dropping any names, I mean, unless you want to, what's your magnum opus or your success story of someone who has like really responded to you well, and you're so happy with where they got? Like, what did that journey look like?
So it's not an end story of the student ended up at X. I mean, yes, this is Central St. Martin's, we've got the connections. You're definitely going to get different students going to different sort of fashion houses, working at different brands. For me, it's more that internal journey. So for a student who, for example, there was a student in our group who was going to leave the course at the beginning of the stage. And this has happened in previous years, where then that puts me on heightened alert. Okay, so why are you going to leave? What's the reason? And you try and break those barriers down. Can I change that for you? Can I help? It's, you know, you can apply for this and support. And then sometimes students face that when they go into BA, and they want to drop out for different reasons. And just having that conversation of, okay, well, why and what can we do to kind of keep you on the path? And that them graduating and just, you know, spreading their wings, and then, you know, they're keeping in contact, and then they're working in different places. And for me, it's very much that initial wobble when you can help them. And so, she was going to leave, and she stayed, and she's gone to Central St. Martin's. And just the fact that I was part of that journey.
Just letting someone bloom.
Yeah, or being a support network to help that happen.
Yeah. It's like that kind of like, no, don't let someone fall. I think that, I've visualized that a lot being here. Like, I've never really felt like apart from me having to return from the deferral, but that was never really a kind of, I didn't feel like I fit in issue. That was, other things. Yeah. So, I guess it's just, it's as simple as that, finding a place, like if you're growing in a place, and even if you have a little bit of a wobble, and if there's those moments, like I was always prepared that, could be the next project where I'm like, oh God, everything feels completely different and I don't like this anymore and this is crazy. It's kind of always been a bit aware of that creative burnout, and anything like that.
But then now hopefully you know the sort of framework, so you reach out, you share, you do what you've got to do to kind of.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the space I think has brought. I even came into this where I was like, well, I'm a bit older than everyone else, and I'm not from London, I'm not from anywhere out of nowhere. I'm probably going to stick to myself and just get through this course and stuff. And then, naturally you actually build a little space and you build a little collective, and boom, you've got your I guess support network.
Find your people.
Yeah, it's
So when I was at Royal College, I very much kept myself to myself, didn't really mingle with my peers. Now they're my best friends. It's funny, your journey.
Or almost when you're reluctant, when you're not actually trying to pursue a friendship, then the friendship sometimes becomes even stronger as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, I think that's it. I think we'll leave it there. That was really good. That was exactly a nice little balance.